My name is Michael Lusk.
Doreen Uhas Sauer, like the beginning of sauerkraut, S-A-U-E-R.
And I'm a former downtown commissioner.
I'm a retired educator with Columbus Public Schools. My background with the city was really in the University Area Commission, which I joined in 1984. So that makes me near 40 years, I guess, at this.
Well, I've volunteered in several different areas. Of course, the Downtown Commission, but I'm also a member of the Downtown YMCA, which is now the Housing and Shelter Board. And I had quite a bit of experience volunteering with the Chamber of Commerce early on what was called the Downtown Council of the Chamber. And we did things like start the Red, White, and Boom, the Christmas parade, things like that. So, and the banner program I was in charge of. So, and oh yeah, the retail, I was on the retail committee. So I was pretty active in those kind of community activities.
It really started before then because I was involved in the 70s living in the university area, which I've always lived in, helping with downzoning in a kind of a grassroots effort, self-taught, about how you approach something like downzoning with the city. And out of that grew a lot of the other ways I've been connected with the city over the years. The University Area Review Board, the Historic Resources Commission, the Christopher Columbus Statue Committee. So it's been sort of a interesting parallel lives sometimes, one on a very intense community track and one in education, and various times when they blended together to create actually a sort of a third track. So I guess that's both professionally and community-wise.
My specific role was architect, so the downtown architect. And I think there was one position that was historic architect and resident and so forth. So mine was architect. I served for 26 years from the conception of the commission. I love being on the commission, so I made time. And it wasn't a huge commitment of time, but you know, when you're passionate about something, it just happens. Initially I was just asked, and it was interesting, but as I found out more about it and how the commission operated, it was so different than my experience as an architect in more suburban type review commissions. So we were very much a pro-development, pro-saying yes kind of commission, trying to find ways to say yes, which I thought was very refreshing and really enjoyed that part of serving.
We had our own set of bylaws in terms of who's president and this and that, and city staff, and it was only a 7-person board, which I believe it still is. So in a way, by delineating the types of professions that people could be on, or just even a public voice person, someone who represented the community in a broad sense of the word, but having an architect and having a developer and having these various roles, you sort of develop your own kind of expertise. You really are becoming a leader.
There was committees put together to kind of rewrite the downtown zoning code. The zoning code in Columbus was really written more around suburban zoning concepts. They didn't really work very well downtown. And so any project that was being built downtown had to go through a lot of variances. So this really got away from the whole concept of variances. Put a lot of power in the commission to review things and make judgments as to whether it was an appropriate approach to the development.
The Design Review Board is an interesting animal because after the university area, by the end of the 80s, was essentially more stable because the downzonings had happened. What we started to really experience at that point was a lot of absentee landlords, And there were big names in some of them. It wasn't local people who were owning a couple houses or even local realty companies, but it was dominated by others who were coming in to create almost a pyramid scheme for real estate for investors in Akron and Cleveland and Canton and other places by buying up houses and then essentially paying them what their investment was worth, but these are people who never saw the places, to find that the investment properties that the company was holding, these were just rife with code enforcement issues. I was in basements where there was an inch of water on the ground with electrical cords running through it, and this company knew full well what was happening. And students are often, and they still are, reluctant to sort of lose where they're at, especially if the rent is cheap, and so they don't call in, or they don't know where to call for code, or they're afraid they're going to get kicked out. They're looking for affordable housing too. And so the neighborhood was turning again, but it was also turning on the fact that now what was under assault were any lot in the university area for being rebuilt. And that was another developer, not the previous investor. That was a local developer who had decided to start, his father had owned property in the university area. He had grown up. In fact, the neighbors all knew him. And he was buying up houses in and around his particular old homestead, and then demolishing them, because demolition is permitted unless you're in a historic district. And historic districts were rare. We actually now have more historic districts and single properties on the city register than any other area commission. And part of that was to protect some of the actual amazing historic potential we had. We had a lot of fabric of the historic character left. And so we sort of piecemeal started that way to try to save those properties. But it became overwhelming. We were lucky enough to really have the development department in the city of Columbus very understanding of what our plight was, but we had no solution, because you just can't simply say no demolition. So we began looking, and when I say we began looking, it was really probably myself and I would say maybe 4 or 5 other people who are on the commission or in community leadership positions who said, there's got to be a solution out here for how we're going to deal with this. We started looking in Ohio because what we wanted was something that would never challenge in the Ohio Supreme Court. It was quite simple. I'm making trips to Bowling Green and Dayton and Kenton. I'm looking first at university areas because, like most university areas, they have the same issues that we do. And nothing was popping up. And then I went to Cincinnati. And in Cincinnati, they had started to do what they called EQD districts, the environmental quality districts. Because they're on hills, they had environmental issues about how they were developing. What could you develop on some of these areas, what was safe to develop, what was going to be substantial and complement any neighborhood that was up there in the hills. And then we looked around the University of Cincinnati, and one had been developed for them. And it was kind of based on the same thing, about not having a radical, essentially investment area, not home ownership or investment together surrounding a university was not going to be a healthy solution. They had never implemented it. In fact, they had 12 environmental quality districts ready to go, most of them based on ecological reasons. So we took it to Department of Development, and I don't think Cincinnati ever knew, but that was what became the basis for the review board and the newest set of, I want to say, overlay that we had. We had an enforceable, actually put into legislation overlay. It was not something that I would say the city ran to excitedly and wanted to see all over the rest of the city, because as soon as we got it, there were other communities that said, why not us, why not us? And the truth was, we were just unusual enough to probably have the backing of the city. So what resulted was a 2 to 3 year study. We didn't intend it to be that long, and we didn't know where exactly it was going to end up. All of a sudden, demolition increased because there was a flurry of activity. We were able to get emergency orders for demolition control while we were working on a plan. Well, the plan was 6 months, and then it was a year, then it was a year and a half, then it was 2 years. I think in total, we had almost complete demolition control in the entire university district for a period of about 3 years while we worked through everything. And we had 2 great planners, Kathy Shaw and Steve McClary, who helped with us. We did extensive studies and projections of how this could work. And we had a lot of developers on our side with it, because a lot of the developers were also concerned about what they saw 1 or 2 bad actors were doing. And I remember very clearly standing in front of a rooming house on 14th Avenue where there was a press conference, and Mike Stinziano Sr. was there, who was state representative, who lived in the neighborhood on King Avenue. And he read this children's story, The Goose That Laid the Golden Egg. And that was really what it was all about. If we continued at the rate we were going without some plan ahead of us, we would either decimate the neighborhood and all of the really great housing that was there and reusable and sustainable and providing a variety of housing for a variety of generations and people growing up there. We were looking for a way to approach this together. It just needs to be regulated, and we need to decide what it is we want and how will we achieve it. The best way to form it is a carrot and stick approach. You can't do this, but you could do this. You can't do that, but you could do this. We like the older houses, and we think that they are suitable for student housing. We find students also like them too. They don't have to be rooming houses, but they could become, some of them are large enough to become a double. So if we work with floor area ratio and we work with other things, now you have a room for a bathroom and another kitchen. And the house is essentially still there. That was really what the review board was about. It was carrot and stick. Pasquale Grado, who was an architect who lived in the area, had his class develop an entire model of the university area. We still have every little wood house, every little wood building is on it. We went through all of the numbers with workshops and workshops with City Council, and it passed going right through. So the review board is kind of an oddity in the city. Most recently, it's been there since 1989, 1990, but it's been successful in what it does. And at one point it was the entire university area. We gradually narrowed it down to really more what was immediately across from the university and edging out in various different ways. Because by that time we had probably 5 or 6 historic districts also in place.
I think as an architect, being able to see all these kinds of works and really seeing in-depth proposals for new developments and how they were being approached, I do that anyway in my practice. I go to conferences and I look at other developments and things that are being done so that I can learn. So it was a learning experience for me, but I also wanted to be able to give back to the community and serve particularly the downtown.
There isn't a case that I can think of where suddenly we didn't all turn to Bob Dice, who was at the end of the table, who was a developer and knew that what he was going to ask was about, what are you going to do about trash cans or whatnot? It was like having a sanitation expert. He owned quite a bit of property. That was the original owner of Buckeye Real Estate. And so it was inevitable he would ask that. It would be inevitable if I would ask some other question that had to do probably with design of the house, even though I'm not an architect, but it was more on the line of my background is much more historic preservation. So you have the ability to bring what you know best to the board and be able to have that voice. And by working together, it is really important.
I didn't say it, but somebody said, downtowns are everybody's core district. I mean, everybody identifies a city with its downtown. So, being vibrant, I think, is incredibly important. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to travel. My last quarter at Ohio State, I had the opportunity to study under a Swiss architect in Switzerland. So I got to visit a lot of European cities, larger cities, and look at how those cities came about, the density and so forth. I came back to Columbus and I was working for an architect that was part of the Rhodes Tower. And we were up at the top of the Rhodes Tower one day and I looked around and it just struck me seeing all these empty parking lots, all these, lack of construction. It was sad. So it's been really satisfying to watch the city grow and watch all the development that's occurred in so many different aspects. So, I think cities need things. They need residential, they need recreational, housing, office. It's made up of a lot of elements that make it vibrant. It was great being on commission to see all those different elements come together.
I was going to say one of the advantages of being, on my part, that I see, the city may not see it this way, is being either long-lived or feeling like you have some kind of legacy in an area, is that you do build these trust relationships with others. And so in just even talking with a Kevin Wheeler, a Mark Dravelis, people who had been our interns as students, grad students.
If you're thinking about becoming a board member, a commission member, You ought to think of it in terms of what's important to you. Are you passionate about what that board does? If you're doing it to build your resume or to build status, then you shouldn't do it. It's not what these boards are about. They're really there to serve, and you got to be passionate about serving and contributing. On a couple of rare occasions, we had downtown commission members that got on for the wrong reasons. They didn't last long, but it was obvious that their priorities were not to serve. I would say passion and the desire to serve and make what that board's goals are better.
I think we all, if we stop growing and learning and figuring out better ways to be better people, it's pretty sad. And I think anytime that you're interacting with a lot of people in different ways, you take those same lessons through.
The legacy you leave behind, I think, is never one big thing. It's all the little things you do. One example, COSI brought a sign into us to get it approved. And quite frankly, it was boring. I mean, it was what they thought we would accept, because zoning boards don't like signage, right? Everybody knows that. I said to them, excuse me, but you're COSI. You're all about fun. This sign is not fun at all. Can you bring us something that has some color to it, some playfulness? They did. Again, something really small. Is that my legacy? No, that's a piece of it, A lot of those little things that along the way I suggested or the board discussed and made something better.
I don't think any one person can describe their own legacy. And I'm not trying to avoid the question what other people remember you for. So that is yet to be written. Somebody who couldn't say no to a committee is what my husband says. And so maybe that is, he used to kid me that I never met a committee I didn't think couldn't do something useful. So maybe that's my legacy. I think my only words of wisdom would be really get involved and try to understand the history of your neighborhood, your city, and take the difficult history along and not try to remake it, but understand where it came from and point in the direction you want it to go.
I've talked about the Downtown Commission to a lot of colleagues around the country because I think the approach the Downtown Commission had to zoning, where we were more subjective, less prescriptive in our approach, allowed for a lot of creativity. We've had a lot of really great architects bring us, and planners bring us great projects. So it's been really easy to say yes, but when I go to other cities to get projects approved for my office, many times they want you to fit into their box. Well, we didn't have a box. We had bring us what you've got and show us why you're doing it. That's what made me so proud to be on this board and this commission.
I think when I look back at this in the long haul, the most important part of what I take away from it was the ability to connect with the actual city at the level of the Department of Development, because it was much more of a time period in which there was time for conversation and time to be able to be seeing each other as really partners.
Well, on behalf of the City of Columbus Development Department Planning Division, we thank you for your service.
I very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's quite all right. Thank you for asking.
Okay.